Thank you, thank you. Test, 1, 2. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
welcome.
Well,
Thank you for coming today. I appreciate this. And Jeannie, thank you very much, wherever you are, for the invitation.
There she is.
Oh, there she is. Hi, Jeannie.
all right, so I'm going to do the official, unofficial that doesn't need to be done, but I get to do the introductions. And as Mickey made reference to, this is happening because of Jeannie and Carol's relationship. These are two women who I feel in Sonoma County are saving our county and our environment. So. Caryl has been Mickey's partner and wife for 30 years, and she has been a devoted PhD lawyer defending the land. And I can't thank you enough for that. I said to her when I first met her, she's been chairman of the California Coastal Commission as well as being the director of Sonoma County Regional Parks. And that you really have to admire because that's a lot of slow meetings with a lot of regulatory control. And you don't get to move really fast on advocacy, but she hung in there and she made things happen for all of us. So we're quite grateful to you, Caryl, for what you do.
Thank you. Thank you.
And the man who needs no introduction other than how you relate to this man's talent and his history in music and what he's created in our country and our world, Mr. Mickey Hart, the percussionist from the Grateful Dead. As you know, he spent many years entertaining all of us over the years, and he has been so well regarded as a talented drummer and percussionist. Rolling Stone named him one of the 100 best drummers in the world. He is, many albums have gotten his Planet Drum got a World Music Grammy, the first one. So a very talented man. But the most important thing that impresses me is that he's now working on working with percussion and beat as it relates to brain development and how that impacts the world and what are all the variables around that. And he goes as far out as thinking about beats and pulse from the supernovas in space. So that's pretty impressive, Mickey, in terms of the deep, truly brain research about beats and percussion. So it's kind of like you've gone from far out, baby, to working in far out ways. Is that right? You've come full circle.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
That too.
The 60s was far out, baby, and now you are far out.
Yeah, that was
13.8 billion years worth.
That's right. And then Dennis McNally, he is a biographer, and he is going to lead the conversation today. And he was brought to Jerry Garcia's attention when he wrote a book about
Jack Kerouac.
I was going to say Jack. I'm old now, people.
Jack
You used to hear me
Kerouac.
talk. Jack Kerouac. And Jerry Garcia was so impressed, he called him and he said, please be the biographer for the Grateful Dead. He came and he did that for years and ended up being the publicist. And now he wrote the book of It's a Long Road.
A long
Yeah,
street.
it's a
A Long Road?
That
What?
too.
I don't know.
Yes.
I read
It
it
certainly
72
is.
times.
The road's not getting any
I read
shorter
it
either.
72 times, and I still can't find my keys today. And it's a long and winding road, or what is the road?
Now you've gotten into the Beatles.
That's what I thought. I thought, wait, I'm moving over to the Paul.
The phrase is a long, strange trip.
A long, strange trip.
Okay.
Yep.
That sounds great.
You know, that's a good lyric for a song.
Tell Hunter he may come up with
Oh my goodness, I think that's yeah.
Yeah, who knew slow deterioration of the brain, Mickey? I might need drum rolls or
you
something.
need to start
Pardon
getting
me?
into a drum circle. It'll help.
That may be next for me when I find my keys. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, a fabulous afternoon with some very talented people. Dennis, you take it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. So I realize that you came here to hear Mickey and Caryl, but my job is, among other things, to lay down a little context. So, I'll try and be succinct and not wander the way I usually do, but bear with me. Let's start with Woodstock, which is to say that delightful bird out there with a tie-dye T-shirt on in the lobby. Many of you may know that the character was in Mr. Schulz's cartoons for years before he was named, or he or she. I find one of the interesting things is it's not specific, and it doesn't have to be. The point is, there's this magic world called Peanuts that doesn't really, that Sparky, I guess what everybody seems to call him, so I'll be bold enough to say, paid a lot of attention to the outside world, but filtered it through his own inside world to create this sort of magic world with no adults in it. And no outside reality, generally speaking, no other events, except Woodstock. And I think that's an amazing statement, because what it, to me, says is that Woodstock, which is really basically code for the 60s, and by the way, the 60s lasted at least until we got rid of Nixon in 74, so. This Woodstock was such an iconic event, such a fundamental event of a generation, and really of the most challenging generation in the last 100 years anyway. That Sparky said, good name for the bird, and that's so thus we are here, thanks to Gene. Let me observe just very quickly that there are a lot of Woodstocks. That is, getting back to the event we're going to talk about. There's the event itself that Mickey was at, and what he's going to tell you may surprise you, because it's not quite the bag of fun that for many of us Woodstock, certainly our memory gives it. There's the initial coverage of Woodstock by the media, which was actually very negative. What a mess, and 500,000 people, and rah, rah, rah. And then as the weekend passed and nothing bad happened, everyone suddenly went, wow, this is really rather wonderful. 500,000 people. They're taking care of each other. They're getting wet, really, really wet. And they're not complaining about it. This is really nice. And then the final Woodstock, and that sort of stayed that way to now. The final Woodstock was the movie, of course. If you haven't seen it, or at least lately, I recommend it. Outside of the fact that there's great music in it, it's cutting at the technology of having split screen and this and that. Remember, this is 1970, it's 50 years ago. Now with CGI, it might look, oh well, but trust me, for its era, it was dazzling. So there were those things. So let me just give you, I did go to graduate school in history. I would be shot if I didn't give you a very brief historical layup to Mickey stepping off the helicopter backstage at Woodstock. The fundamental, of course, event that was going on, not in America, but through America, was the war in Vietnam. For those of you who might be too young to know, in that day, that involved a universal draft for all men, which is to say, it engaged everyone in a way that current wars don't, because there is no draft, and most people don't have to pay any money. So there was a resistance to that, but there was more than that. Early in 1968, there's something called the Tet Offensive, in which basically all the sort of American notions that there was just a bunch of small, I'm not going to use the words, but small people from Asia, and we'd go in there and wipe them out, and it'd be easy. And they found out otherwise, in fact. They got their heads handed to them in an offensive that nobody saw coming. And then you have the death of Martin Luther King, the assassination of Martin Luther King. And then you have the assassination of Bobby Kennedy. And then you have the 1968 Democratic Convention in Chicago, in which, as the demonstrators chanted, "The whole world is watching," the Chicago Police Department rioted and beat a lot of people. In '69, in the Bay Area, you have something called People's Park, in which helicopters are dropping tear gas on students on Telegraph Avenue and killing a couple of them. Not the helicopters, but the police. And you have a kind of a forerunner and something we'll very much get into as we go along. One of the first great environmental disasters of our contemporary time, the Santa Barbara oil spill, which suddenly reminded people that the environment is a great deal more sensitive than than we had been, that we needed to pay attention, and that led to a lot of really good things, which we'll get to. But let's talk about Woodstock. They came, they conquered, they had a great time. Maybe not so much.
That's not the way I remembered it.
Yeah. So
There was no conquering here.
there was no conquering.
There was a lot of rain.
There was a lot of rain. There were Grateful Dead had a number of fundamental problems at Woodstock. One of them was the fact that they had 1 hour to play, which was not exactly their style. And you just said backstage, it was your fault.
Perhaps.
Or at least you contributed.
I don't blame myself, but it was my fault.
Yeah. Which was, so the Grateful Dead did something that they never, ever did. They tried to get showbiz. If you remember the movie, and most of us I suspect do.
We're not in it.
You're not in it. There's a number of reasons for that, and we'll get to that. But one of the showbiz things you tried to do was to start with a hit, or at least a big
I thought
song.
it was a brilliant idea at the time. I guess it wasn't so good, was
So what happens, they started with the song St. Stephen, which was, like one of the great, sort of band's masterpieces. Unfortunately, it was complicated. It was very tricky. And it needed warming up. And they weren't so warm.
it? Yeah.
And
it was the
you've all said for the last umpteen years that it was the worst show you ever did.
It was close to the worst show we ever did. It was the most terrifying show, that's for sure.
So talk about walking out on that stage.
I don't remember.
That's it.
No, I'm just kidding. It's just a joke. And walking out on the stage, all I see in front of me is a sea of people, and I gasp. And I say, collectively, it was a gigantic gasp. I mean, look at all of those people. We thought we were just alone here in San Francisco. And that's really what it was, what hit me. I said, we're not alone. There's 500,000 people that think sort of kind of like us. And that was the beginning of my stage experience there at Woodstock. I do remember walking out, and I do remember a lot of terrifying things that happened to me while I was out there on that stage.
Tell me what you said about Jerry.
Yeah, well, yeah. I looked over at Jerry, and there was a big spotlight on him. He was doing a solo, and can I have your glasses? I have to do this. He looks at me, and across the stage, and all I could see was fear and terror in his eyes. And I go, oh Jesus, we're in trouble.
We're
now.
in trouble.
And so it went from there to worse. Here's your glass of that.
Thank you. I need them. Among other things, the show took place in a screaming rainstorm. So powerful that there was a big screen behind the band, which was going to be for a light show, right? San Francisco light show. And the wind was so powerful that it was going to act as a sail and literally move the stage, because the stage was not exactly built on concrete, shall we say. And crew members were attacking the screen with knives to cut, slash holes in it so that the wind would pass through instead of destroying the stage. Let's see. You got to hear about how the stage was collapsing.
Oh, yeah, it was screaming. Get off the stage, get off the stage, stage is collapsing. And it's not really the kind of, So And then Bobby was walking up to his microphone and get shocked. Okay, so he didn't want to sing, obviously. And
They had lifted the ground so that this
yeah, it was raining, and it was an overwhelming event, considering we weren't really on solid footing, so to speak, on the stage. It was like a war zone on the stage, and it wasn't conducive to really Grateful Dead music. It's not like so.
and yet you once said something which I thought was really perfect, which was that really, on the other hand, it was a free concert outdoors, which was like your specialty.
A specialty.
And so there was this, you know, it was sort of perfect and sort of perfectly awful.
It was kind of like our party, you know, and we were building towards it all the years, you know, playing free in the park and so forth going on. And wow, here's a nice big free event I mean, this is wonderful. This is just what we want to have, you know, and it was just great, you know, and then, you know, it wasn't so great for a lot of reasons. It was raining.
For a lot of reasons.
It's hard to play in the rain. Not impossible, but difficult. And all the commotion on the stage was really, it was terrifying. It's the only word I could say. You could hear it all, you know, people screaming, get off stage, this stage is collapsing, and, you know, that's not the kind of stuff you want to hear when you're focusing on the music. So it was a horrible situation for us musically. And I do remember walking off the stage. It was so bad. We couldn't put two notes together. And so Jerry and I walked off the stage together, and I was just suicidal. It's the only word I could say. I thought it was all over, that we should just go home and forget about our instruments and try to pick up something else and do something else with our lives. And I said, and he saw me fretting. And he said, "Hey man, relax. This won't affect our career." He was right.
And as usual, he was right. It just sort of.
It was just another bad performance.
And by no means the worst. Trust me, I've listened to a lot. But let me add one other thing. The Grateful Dead famously were not in the Monterey Pop movie because they refused to be. They had dark suspicions of the promoter. They were not in the Woodstock movie, the original Woodstock movie. And I finally really found out why, because Martin Scorsese, the famous director, was at that time a graduate student at NYU and a Deadhead, and really wanted to, you know, put them in the movie and tried to find footage that was usable. In the 40th, if you really want to get wiggy, or the library probably has it too, on the 40th anniversary of Woodstock, they put out a box set, DVD and CD and you name it, that includes the Grateful Dead's performance of Love Light, which is what they closed with. And it looks like the stage is lit by about 5 candles.
We could hardly see each other across the stage. That was another problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You may not, you know it, but in fact, the lights take the vast majority of the power that's consumed on a concert stage. The sound, by comparison, is, you know, a minor aspect, and it's murky. I mean, there's no wonder they're not in the movie. If you think about what you remember from the movie, they're either, if it's at night, then there's like massive spotlights and, you know, showbiz and lighting, or during the day. These guys look like they were playing in a cave. So, yet another reason why they didn't make the cut of the movie.
Luckily.
But like I say,
Thankfully.
Like I say, it wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was, because all I can remember is St. Stephen falling apart in the middle. Yeah, not their shining moment. But what's interesting about all this is that Woodstock, as I say, is really code for the 60s, for what happened in the 60s. In general, it encapsulates it all. And there's like 2 or 3 different sort of strands that flow out of this. And one other thing, I occasionally go and teach high school classes. And these are students who were born, since the year 2000, who are fascinated by the 60s. I mean, these classes are like electives. I'm not teaching a regular, they bring me in as the guy for some, the specific group of people. And and I kept thinking about this. The 60s happened 40 years before they were born. And when I sort of did the math on myself, and I thought, okay, 40 years before I was born was like 1909. And there's nothing about 1909 that I ever cared about when I was in high school. But the fact is that what happened in the 60s, and the reason that these kids are fascinated with it, is that issues that emerged they were old issues, there's nothing new about, for instance, environmentalism, which we'll get to first. John Muir, Thoreau was talking about environmentalism in the 1840s. But the fact is that it got pumped up with steroids. I mean, these issues that we're going to talk about here took a dramatic jump into the consciousness, and they're still part of our daily lives. More now, in some weird ways, more than ever, because we have a political administration that isn't interested, for instance, in environmentalism, or at least what anybody else that I know about thinks about environmentalism. So, there's these three realms. So let's talk about environmentalism. As I say, Woodstock was immediately preceded by the Santa Barbara oil spill, and a lot of stuff happened in the next 5 years. And that's really Carol's
My domain.
sweet spot, yes.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Your domain.
Well, I just want to point out that shortly after the 40 years before Dennis was born, was in 1916, was the beginning of the National Park Service, which many of you may know. So there was, people were beginning to realize that it was important for a variety of reasons, many of which had to do with the importance of tourism and bringing people to the West so that the railroads had a clientele, unfortunately. It wasn't motivated by environmentalism. But nevertheless, early in the 19th, or what would have been, I guess, the 20th century, there was the spark of what was to come. But getting up to the 60s, and I also don't want to forget where we are and the importance of Woodstock to Sparky, and why did he, I keep puzzling over why did he incorporate, why did he choose that character? And I do think it was the consolidation of so many things of what Woodstock represented. So, as I'm sure many of you know, 1960, 1968, 69, 70 was really the spark, the beginning of what we know of as the environmental movement. The Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the Wilderness Act, and Earth Day all happened during that period. So it was just a moment in time where everyone saw what was at risk. And you talk about the oil spill. I'm actually not the chair of the Coastal Commission, but I was just appointed to the Coastal Commission, which is essentially the entity that protects the coast of California from development. It's like a regulatory entity for the coast. So the Coastal Act happened in 1976, but the spark of it was in 1970, and after the oil spill, where they looked all around and saw what was at risk. And the thing, I think, when you think of Woodstock, the character, to me, it's my favorite character because I live in that world. I live in the world of birds and plants and trees and forests and parks. And that's what Woodstock represents to me. But I guess Woodstock represents almost whatever you want. But one thing I think Woodstock definitely represents is freedom, and the freedom that happened at that moment. And Dennis likes to talk about flight. So I was hoping today, as we think about this, is to make that leap. Why was Woodstock the event and that point in history so important and so meaningful? And so many things happened as a result of that. And then here we are today. We're looking at the crisis of climate change, which everyone forgets is a crisis of loss of biodiversity. It's a crisis of loss of public land. It's a crisis of fossil fuels burning that are destroying our atmosphere. So there's so many things that are happening now. So in my mind, I think a lot, and I'm hoping everybody thinks today about what happened then and what's happening now, and how do we bring that energy of what happened then to our world today and not forget what climate change really is underneath, the causes and what it represents.
Yes, that's absolutely true. But if you look at Woodstock, it was more than 500,000 people getting together. It wasn't a rock and roll concert, really. It wasn't any of that. It was a giant raising of consciousness. And there's a writer by the name of E.O. Wilson. I don't know if any of you, anybody, E.O. Wilson. Read E.O. Wilson. He wrote a book once called Superorganism. He got the Pulitzer for ants too, but he's not a very good writer at all. And so he wrote a book called Superorganism, in which he was studying ants, which are a superorganism. His claim is, which I do believe, any two organisms, complex organisms that are in proximity, will eventually, come together and start moving, thinking, super consciousness, we might call it. So that's what was happening at Woodstock. All of these people getting together, it was just a giant gasp. And like I said, we weren't alone, and they knew it as well. So it was just an outpouring of power and good feeling, peace, love, and all that stuff. People were helping people, stopping strangers, shaking hands, all that kind of stuff.
Write that down. Give it to Hunter.
That's another good one. Strangers stopping strangers. Oh no, Jesus Christ, it's terrible. So that's what it was all about. Music was incredible. The performances, a few of the performances were really were beyond anything that anybody could normally do. The performances were never recreated, like Sly and the Family Stone, Santana, let's see, Jimi Hendrix in the morning, waking up for breakfast with Jimi Hendrix playing the Star Spangled Banner was not a bad way,
to start your day.
To start your day. So I stayed later, so the history books say. And
the memory.
But I witnessed a lot of these acts. The band went out by chopper. I wanted to stay behind and witness some of these bands, and I did. I went way up on the hill, and I just sat there around a fire, just like everybody else, and just let it just pour over me. And it was quite amazing. These were extraordinary performances, unlike ours. So they had the moment. And that raised the consciousness as well. So what we have here is a gigantic consciousness-raising experience where everybody is kind of tied into each other, and it's a collective superconsciousness. Is the only way I can see it. Yes, there was rain. Yes, there was confusion. Yes, there was all of these things, but the idea of getting over all this stuff and becoming one, the power of one. 500,000 people as one. That was the big deal. Now, from there, everything went to all of these places, environmental places. They wrote about it. They did all this stuff. But it all started there. And that was the power of Woodstock, if you look at the core of it. It was a concert, but it was more than a concert. And that's how I see it. There was a lot of psychoactive drugs, shall we say, taken at that time. And so we had a little help. There was some chemicals consumed, as they say. And so we were able to experience another reality as well as in our music. We of course, we were very experienced by that time. Is that a good word? Some weren't. Some weren't. They were taking everything they could backstage, and they couldn't perform. I remember Jerry giving Carlos a little bit, and he thought it was going to be he was going to play 6 hours later. Unfortunately, they said, "Now, it's now." So he just went up on the stage, and what you saw was one of those performances as he was coming on, and you could hear it in his guitar. And he wasn't really prepared to go out there, but he said his guitar neck was like a snake, is the way he described it. But he played beautifully, and so that had a lot to do with it as well. So, take it away, Dennis.
I want to. We're going to get to some other realms. I want to go back to one issue because we we discussed this yesterday and sort of blocked things out. And Caryl reminded me of what I must admit is a somewhat painful memory, which is that the greatest environmental president of modern times was Richard Nixon. But it's true, and he founded the Environmental Protection Agency back when it meant something. Was it simply that our generation said, okay, the government's got it, we don't have to deal with this anymore? There seems to me to be a lull. Now, we are in a legitimate state of borderline panic about climate change and about the fact that, I just saw in yesterday's paper that the 100-degree temperatures in Europe are clearly the result of climate change. This was no average heat wave in Europe like in the last 2 weeks. Do you think, what happened after 1974? As somebody who's been involved with this since then?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it is, well, first of all, it was interesting about Nixon, and particularly if you compare it to subsequent Republican administrations that have been really not very proactive when it comes to the environment, to say the least. It's been a pretty negative run, culminating in what we have today. So, I think Nixon saw it to his political benefit because that was the movement at the time. And that was what the public was saying. This is something that's important to us. Social justice is important to us. Environmental protection is important to us. We can't clean drinking water has always been something, frankly, you always include in any kind of bond or any kind of tax measure. Anytime you're trying to get support for parks or for open space, you always include water. And that, I think, was driving a lot of it at the time, is that people really, they didn't have clean drinking water, they didn't have clean air, and they were looking all around, and it was in their face. And so I think people did sort of go into this kind of somnambulistic state when it came to the environment. And in the meantime, in that period of those 40 years, we lost, half of our biodiversity on the planet, if all of you are aware of the recent UN report. A lot of bad things happened, and I don't really want to sit here and tick them off. We're so lucky to be here in a county where we have done a lot to protect our open space and fight back against those kind of forces. But all across the country, whether it's fracking, whether it's usually related to fossil fuels. So if you look at what's happening today, so much of our problems have to do with money. It all comes down to, you have these big fossil fuel companies, they're making tons of money, they have big lobbyists, it's big money, and every time anyone tries to raise environmental issues, boom. So it's only through this worldwide recognition of climate change, which at the end of the day is all these environmental problems. It's not just a matter of that it's hot because we've paved over half the planet, and there's no way for carbon to be sequestered into the ground when all you have is concrete. So all of these things were going on, and the fossil fuel industry, I think, just got stronger and stronger and stronger until we are where we are today. And I think it really is the awareness of climate change and everything it represents that hopefully is going to cause the environmental movement to rise up again and start to do something to save our planet while we still have
Yes, it's absolutely. I remember one of the things of the 60s, we had terrible leaders. Remember, Vietnam was raging. Tet Offensive, like you said, bombs dropping, down on these people, and we were angry, and as we should have been. There were part of the music went to the up against the wall kind of stuff, a revolution, got a revolution, all that stuff. We chose a different tack. We went the other way, the opposite. And guess what? We won. That's right. Music can express a lot of feelings, deep feelings that you don't even know you have. And that all came out at Woodstock. That's why many of these performers had extraordinary performances, because we were mad. We were screaming mad. People were being killed at the universities. Remember, that was all happening. Wasn't that 1970?
Yeah, 69.
69, 70. So really, 60s were really the 70s, in a way, if you look at it. I mean, what happened in the 60s really came forth in the 70s. That's where you saw the repercussions of what we did in the 60s. It was, like you said, the big word is the big freedom. Once we realized we had freedom, there was no stopping us. We were able to play more than 3.5 minutes. Remember, when we started, there was nothing on the radio more than 3.5. Matter of fact, there wasn't even FM radio at the time. So, and I do remember getting up in the middle of the night at 2 o'clock in the morning and listening to a radio station, what you call it, KSAN.
KSAN?
That was the only time I could hear my music, was at 2 o'clock in the morning. Because we played 20, 30, 40, 50 minutes a song back then. So we didn't play songs, we played opus stuff, epic things. It wasn't like 3.5 minutes of anything. We never played a 3.5 minute. We never played for 3.5 minutes, I don't think.
I don't think so.
No, I don't think so. And so freedom in everything. But we did forget the environmental things for a while, until some people who were really bent into it picked it up. And then it became endemic. And then everybody started thinking, a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit there. We're losing this, losing that.
The rainforest was a big deal. Like, the band really stepped forward. Remember, they went to Congress, they testified for rainforest protection. That was in the 80s.
Yeah.
So
That's right.
you did step forward, and you guys didn't do that much.
We did step forward. We did. Bobby and I mostly went to Congress, and we had some success. And it was a time when people started thinking about things and not just going with the government, what they were saying, because the government was taking us down. By the way, I just want to inject that Nixon was a great environmental president, even though he might, he was, a jerk as a president. He was. He was really environmentally on top of it, and Caryl can speak about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, just what I was saying in terms of what passed, what he supported. Can you imagine in our current administration having, the Clean Water Act? It's like the complete opposite. So not to just be political about it, but it's just the reality of the situation. And when we're talking about Woodstock, it's hard for us to just be, oh, everything's fine now. It's just great. So it's hard for us to avoid that. And I know there's probably some people here, perhaps, that do support the administration. I'm sure there are things to support. But when it comes to the environment, it is a freaking disaster. So we have to fight back.
How many people in here?
No, you can't do that.
How many people were at Woodstock?
Woodstock, that's it.
Better question.
How many were at Woodstock?
3 hands. Terrific.
Well, you.
Let me. So I want to tell. I want to tell a little story that Wavy Gravy tells in one of his books. Because I'd like to shift now to the sort of the social consequences of what you were saying earlier about that feeling that we are one. And I felt it, and I was 300 miles away in the backwoods of Maine working in a woolen factory. But no, but I thought something magical has happened, and I'm 19, I'm part of this. Even if I wasn't there. But the story that Wavy tells is that there were these two guys in the audience, and evidently they started getting on each other's nerves in some fashion, and they were, oh yeah, and they were going to have a fight. And nothing too profound, but they were going to punch each other a little. And they were surrounded by people who started chanting peace, peace. And after a while, they were so embarrassed by all the attention that they were getting that they sort of cracked up, because, it was just, impossible. And shook hands, and, on we go. Most of you will remember that the logo of Woodstock was the dove of peace. It was essential part of the package, the mental package. But there are a lot of other aspects, because that was a representation of the whole idea of the peaceful hippie. Okay? Well, when you start asking people consciously to be peaceful, especially guys, let's be realistic here, you're challenging testosterone. You're challenging the whole idea of the macho guy. And that leads to things like feminism and gay liberation and a general recognition, as Mickey said, that we're all one. And how can you pick on, somebody that's actually just an extension of you? And all that, what Mickey said, I think is truly true, which is we won in the sense that if you, for instance, and this connects all of this stuff, if you buy organic food by preference, even if knowing that you have to pay a little more, if you do yoga or have some relationship to Asian thinking, teachings, whatever, you're part of Woodstock. You're part of the '60s. That's an essential part of it. And the feminism, which produces Cornell University. Where did you go to law school?
USF.
Oh, anyway.
But I did go to Berkeley to grad school, so I don't.
There you go. But no, I mean, of the people on the stage, Caryl is the junior by age.
Only.
And only by age. And the fact is that for you to think about, I'm going to be a lawyer.
Yeah.
That was a concept. I think that was in part a part of a feminist wave that came out of the '60s.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a lot of people that had the opportunity coming, so I went to college in the '70s, the late '70s, and at that time, I think that there was the wind of Woodstock flowing through to anyone that was open to hear it, that anyone that cared about civil rights, anyone that cared about environmental protection, social justice. I mean, these are the things that if you had a chance to become a lawyer, to be a civil rights lawyer, to be an environmental lawyer, and I guess as a woman, for me personally, I saw that there weren't as many women at that time. Now the majority of law students are women, which is amazing. But
there's hope yet.
I mean, I felt that was part of the package, that I was dealing with addressing that there weren't enough women going into that. But mainly, I think a lot of people, a lot of us, probably a lot of people in this group felt like this is something we had to do, and a lot of it, the spark was Woodstock and that mentality.
I think you're right. You were talking yesterday about that it empowered people, that people came out of Woodstock wanting to do something. It wasn't just, boy, was that fun.
Yeah,
it
right.
was
right.
Yeah, everybody wanted to do
Inspired.
something. They wanted to
It's
create
empowerment.
something. The vision thing was happening. And I still have it, unfortunately.
Vision thing.
And we're glad.
The vision thing. Yeah. So that all came out of Woodstock. Yeah, a lot of things came out of Woodstock that wasn't really apparent, really.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that's kind of the message of today, and that Sparky picked up on that, with the character of Woodstock and everything that Woodstock did. Woodstock was always coming in and shaking things up. That was the rule, right, Jeannie? It seemed to me. Just when things would be going smooth, it'd be like, whoa, So I think that's why it's such an appropriate name and such an appropriate thing that we're all here today celebrating the concert.
I think that happened 50 years
50
ago.
years,
Yeah,
that's
50
right.
years.
That's why we're here.
Yeah. And you were 2 years old, right? You were
That's
such
nice.
a cute baby.
Oh, yeah.
I loved you so much back then.
Like revenge. Do you think we should do questions?
So a little bit
What
of
are you thinking?
little bit of funny story. So we know from history, it tells us that one of our greatest performances was at
Cornell.
Barton Hall.
Cornell in what 1977.
1977.
So
You say that Barry Manilow thing, it's over for you. It's been 30 years, but this.
wait till we get home.
I never. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I forgot this thing.
We're going to skip that
Oh,
story?
yeah, we're going to skip that story? No,
Skip
we're
that
not
story.
going to skip that story. So my wife didn't come to see the concert that she was going to school. She didn't come to see the concert. Her boyfriend took her out to see Barry Manilow.
That is
or
complete,
something.
total fabrication. That is
Maybe I'm making this up. I don't know. So what?
very mad.
Okay,
They're gonna
speaking
believe
as
it.
a man trying to save a guy from marital discord, I'm going to change the subject, but I was planning on doing it anyway. And there's a third stream. There's environmental, there's endless social consequences. And again, just let me point out, all those social consequences, like the most obvious being, in terms of current politics, feminism / Me Too / gay issues are, day-to-day news in our lives now. This is not something that just happened 50 years ago. It just got oomph. But let's go to a third realm, and that is Mickey's actually favorite subject. And I got to say, I've been following him around in this realm now for 30 or 40 years. Mickey brought the Kyoto monks, recorded the Kyoto monks, and then ended up in Amherst, Massachusetts, and I happened to tag along, and I was there. I was a brand new member of the staff of the Grateful Dead. It was a day off, and so they're recording, and at the end of it, he goes up and he's talking with the abbot of the monks, and said something to the effect of, how's your tour? Because what had happened was that at some point around then, the Dalai Lama had decided that the secret positive of the Chinese repression of Tibet was that it was going to send whatever Tibetans had learned, which is quite a lot, around the world and spread that message. And that part of that was the Kyoto monks, who had originally what they chanted was like kind of secret, considered a dark secret. So now they were going to go out and actually share it with audiences. And this was their first tour of America. And somehow Mickey knew way in advance, and there we were in Amherst. And at the end of the session, which was just unbelievable, these are people who can sing a chord, right? A chord is 3 notes. And one throat cannot sing 3 notes unless you're a Kyoto monk. And they can, and so when you get a bunch of them together, and then you get a complete maniac using the best sound system in the world with it, it sounds like the gates of heaven. It is simply beyond belief. And so Mickey ends the day by basically saying, as I remember it, more or less, "So how's it going?" to the abbot. And there was an interpreter. And the abbot said, "Well, to be honest, not great. We're not making any money." I mean, the idea of this tour was to raise funds for their
In exile.
a monastery in Dharamsala in India. And Mickey, being Mickey, said, "Listen, one thing we know how to do is make money. We'll put on a show for you." And then I swear this is true. And then he turned to me and said, "Denny, sell it out." Well, it was not hard. The Kyoto monks were extraordinary, and we sold the Berkeley Community Theater out, and made them probably the best, their best payday of that tour. And in fact, the Grateful Dead family, adopted them, and various people in the family managed their tours for umpteen years after. And I must say that I always felt, whenever at the end of a tour, we would get these katas, which are these white scarves, as a gift of thanks. And the abbot would put it around my neck, and I always felt as I had a big smear of peanut butter and jelly on my cheek when he did that, because I always felt about 3 years old. I mean, there's just something about those people that was exceptional. But the point is, Mickey sort of went into it because of sound. It's his specialty. But this isn't just about sound, it's about consciousness. And I see that.
Oh, sound-raising consciousness. That's
and
the connection.
sound-raising consciousness.
Yeah, that's the reason that we make music, to raise consciousness. We're not there necessarily, I am not there just to entertain. when I go on stage, it's going to church. So when people clap, that freaks me out. I don't like to hear no clapping. So I mean, it's a raising of consciousness, which takes practice. It really does.
The point being that
These guys were professionals, is what Dennis, I think, is alluding to. These monks, what they do is each larynx has the ability to hold 3 notes, a whole chord. So they empty their whole bodies of everything, all feeling, and then they recreate a perfect universe in their bodies. And they use sound, like a sound mandala, very much. And so this was a big uplifting. When I went to Amherst and recorded them, the first thing I said, Jerry's got to hear this. He won't believe this one. Because I do a lot of strange stuff, a little weird, off the beaten path things. But this was pretty good. So the monks taught us a lot. We helped them in exile, and if any conclusion to this particular vein, it's that sound is very powerful. Sound works on our brains in a way that makes us do what we do. This is the master clock. What it says, we do. And vibration is the essential ingredient in life. Everything has vibration. Everything that lives has vibration. Music is controlled vibrations. And we in the Grateful Dead knew this very well. We were a dance band for sure, but we wanted them to dance for other reasons than just to enjoy themselves, to be able to understand their consciousness and be able to relate to other people, dance with people. That's a metaphor, really, and that's how we saw it. So all these events that happened to us, Woodstock, all of these things, these little building blocks over the years, we kind of played with in the beginning, because we couldn't play in a lot of places that didn't like us and stuff. So we played too long or something too loud, so these places allowed us to be free and to play our stuff, as they say in the trade.
Because I'm a scholar and therefore I don't need to be original, I'm going to steal one of his 2 or 3 very best lines in history, which is, we're not in the entertainment business, we're in the transportation business. We move minds. And that's what you've been doing. Let me touch on 2 of the most interesting ways you've been moving minds, or having your own moved, in the last 20, 30 years, which are your brain research, in terms of rhythm, percussion, and healing, and all that. I saw you do, it's like wearing this helmet, which was in fact full of brain receptors, and you'd see it on the screen, what was going on in Mickey Hart's brain, which is quite frightening.
Wasn't pretty, Dennis.
It was not pretty.
It was beautiful in a certain kind of way, but you had to be me to love it.
Well,
I took out all the gray matter.
There you go. But we as we gathered, this is at Mission Bay in the city where the man who introduced us, who was like the dean or something of UC Med School, said, if Alzheimer's is defeated in the next 5 years, it'll be in this building, which Mickey plays only the little rooms. I mean, so what I'm saying is, I was there that night. Have you come up with any conclusions from the research of that area? Or is it still just ongoing?
Now we know what part of the brain lights up with what rhythm, what stimuli, and we also know about pushing gamma wave, pushing beta waves. We know what these gammas and betas and thetas and all these things do now, and we can actually, with MRI and all these things, and with electrodes and so forth, we can actually see brain activity. And when I play, you could see what my brain is doing, and then I start to follow my brain. As I'm doing things, I can follow that rhythm, and eventually it leads to other things and so forth and so on. And this is being tracked, of course, by Dr. Adam Ghazali in the lab at UCSF, and that's where I have the rhythm in the brain thing going.
And it's still going. Good. Last sort of realm, and then we're gonna
Well,
go to
question and
Q&A because we want you guys involved too. But the last realm, because it really is the most far out, as Karen pointed out, and that is, we all know that there are cosmic events going on out there, supernova, quasars, whatnot, and they produce waves, light waves, which after billions of years get here. And you've been working with a guy named George Smoot to in effect use those waves to compose music.
That's correct. Absolutely correct. George Smoot, astrophysicist, won the Nobel 2006. Smoot's accomplishment was he found what we call the cosmic background radiation. These are all vibrations. That's why I'm talking about this. Is all vibratory universe things, and that's what we live in. Smoot found the echo of the Big Bang, which happened 13.8 billion years ago. His was 400,000 years this side of the Big Bang. And so when I met Smoot, and he played me the birth cries of the universe, okay, this is something for a drummer, because I always wanted to find beat one. Where does the downbeat? Where did it happen? When did it happen? It happened everywhere.
Ignored the one, but go on.
It happened everywhere 13.8 billion years ago. So that was the reason I met Smoot, because I was on the track of the downbeat of where the rhythm started. Where did time and space start? So that's led into sound and music and Grateful Dead and all that. It was all part of this stream. So that's where George came in, and it was great riding with George because, an astrophysics Nobel laureate, and we were trading. So what happened was I started gathering radio waves from cosmic events in the universe, all vibratory, and I would take those, that radiation, the sound decouples. Radiation, the light moves on. Captured those radio waves, took that into an algorithm, changed the form of radiation, light, into sound, and took those sounds and made compositions out of those sounds and made music out of those sounds. Now, Pythagoras, he lived 500 BC. Now, he figured it out too. It wasn't just me. But he didn't have the gear that I did.
You have Meyer.
Yeah, I have Meyer sound. Pythagoras didn't have Meyer sound.
Yeah,
but Pythagoras would be here and he'd be laughing right now saying, "Yeah, I told you so."
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
true.
So anyway, that's, we found, a lot of vibratory inspiration from the universe and from the primal vibrations that this universe was born in.
And I wish Jerry were around to hear that.
Yeah.
No, because he.
Well, Jerry and I rode.
There was a
the same-
reason
we
that.
still rode the same road a lot.
Yeah. Well, and
On these kind of things.
there's a reason why the Grateful Dead's, for my money, but one of the legendary Grateful Dead songs is "Dark Star." It's about going out there.
That's right. Okay.
We we know that there are interesting minds out there. So Jessica, would you adjust the light? And so we can see all your smiling faces. And Jessica's going to have a wireless mic. So would you be so kind, because that way everybody can hear, raise your, if you got a question or a comment or a whatever, raise your hand, yeah. And
The young lady.
the young lady on the house left.
Honor. I'm right now really have so many questions, so many, wishing I would have brought my girls, because I do things like this with them to torture them so that they learn about this kind of stuff. I play anything from 1920s on up for my kids. My one question is, with the music of today and the brain, because I think music just absolutely moves, it's moved me for years. I'm super nervous, sorry. Do you ever have the people of today that the music that they play that's very violent, very horrible, sorry, I have to say it. How can you advise them? How can you reach them to teach them about how music moves and how music changes, just like Woodstock did? It was just a huge event, and I agree with you. I wasn't there, but it it still moves me today, and I know it moves obviously a lot more people, but how would you advise some of these newcomers of music that isn't music in my eyes? How would you advise them?
That's a good point. Good question. It's what you need to gather is what they call the extended ear, or you have to allow yourself to be able to understand different kinds of musics, to be able to discern what music really interests you and what doesn't. You have to reach out for these musics. And you have the internet now. Before, I had to go to Mongolia, you know. Now you just dial it up. So you have to look for the music that inspires you. Music is everywhere. Music is fundamental. There's no culture on this earth that does not have its music. Think of it. It's essential. Right up there with sex and food.
Why don't you talk about what turned you on to the world's music? Because I always think that's such a great story about having those records, your parents having those records, and I think that that's what you're talking about. How can you expose your children to different kinds of music? So, I mean, that's something.
Like I said, reach out, look for it, search for it,
And
because
have it
it's
in
not
the
going to necessarily come to you. So you've got to do a little bit of.
How can
More peace and more violence. Well, there are angry people, and then there are peaceful people. And music is supposed to reflect the community, whatever it is. And it does a good job, for better or worse. I mean, anybody should express themselves through music. You could be angry in your music and not hurt anyone. There's that. And you can also do a lot of things with music. Music is, like I said, is not a luxury, it's an essential. You know.
I was just thinking, though, that, you know, one thing that we used to have is we used to have LPs in our house. And so that's, Mickey always tells that story of having his mom or you or whatever had all these LPs from around the world.
Yeah.
And so you see the pictures. And I mean, I think that can turn kids on to an idea that it's just not what you know, that you can see these people from wherever, whether it's the monks, whether it's people from Africa, whether it's Olatunji, and then you hear, you know, so that's just an idea of something.
I got turned on
Other
by my
people on.
mother's collection of Count Basie and Duke Ellington recordings that she
Yeah.
inherited. And I was like 5 years old, and I opened up this big album, and in the middle of it was the Ituri Rainforest Pygmies. And nobody wanted to listen to pygmy music, did they? I did. I loved pygmy music. So they were listening to Count Basie, I was listening to the Pygmies forage, and I became one with them, and at least at 6 years, 7, 8 years old. And that kind of propelled me into all of this world music thing, and Library of Congress and Smithsonian and all the things that I've done over the years actually came back to that one moment where something came into my life. I didn't have to go out. So those are the two ways things. You can come in or you can go out, one of the two. But you should be reaching out for the music that inspires you and makes you dance. Anything else here?
Okay, somebody else.
Hi. Great discussion, thanks. Speaking of the internet, do you feel that the Grateful Dead community might have had something to do with the creation of it?
Yeah, I heard that.
Yeah.
Let me give you two prime examples. The very first...
Good question, thank you.
The very first chat group was a gaggle of deadheads, true story, on the Well, which was Whole Earth Electronic Link. Stuart Brand's.
Oh, that's good.
And it was it was actually called an EBB, an electronic bulletin board, but it was a chat group, and it was all deadheads. And for those of us who remember, when
that was right after I invented the internet.
Exactly, you and Al. But at the same time, at the very beginning of commercially available internet was AOL, right? Was the first big dog, and they charged by the hour, or there was a time charge involved with how much you paid for your service, and they told me because I, as the publicist for the Grateful Dead, I got a free account, and they told me, you're getting this because we're being kept solvent, because only Deadheads will stay on for 12 hours. We're making so much money off you, we have to do this.
Oh, that's true. Like in the old days, they would have the telephone. Remember telephones?
The modems.
They had a telephone in the back of the hall, and they were hooked up to their friends on the East Coast and so forth. And that's how it used to go. Okay, people had the real phones off the wall and everything, not cell phones. And then it went into the well, and and it was totally perfect for Deadheads because they can talk for hours about it, and they can go and go and go. So that was perfect, yeah. And that was a great invention of mine.
But can I just say one thing on the? I just want to add that the Deadheads have been the core of so many of the movements, the environmental movement, the social debt, all of the things we've talked about. If you look at the core of that, and this goes all the way up to senators, Senator Leahy and Senator Franken when he was there, and others, that are the vice president, when Gore, so all these people would show up at shows, and it was a unit though, the fans and everything they were doing to bring these issues to light. So I don't think that you can leave that out.
That's an interesting thought. We did attract a lot of
Still true
politicians
today.
and intellectuals, and we became familiar with them, and they needed to be with us, and we just certainly needed to be with them to be able to understand what we felt. There was a lot of feeling. It was the age of feeling. We didn't really know. I mean, we couldn't write it down because it was happening to us so fast. We didn't know what we were doing. And that was perfect, because if you just go at life and with no fear, back then it was possible. Now there are a lot of fears. Back then we were just in Haight-Ashbury. We all lived in the same house, and we walked down the street. Everybody, we all know each other and stuff. Jerry could walk down the street. I could walk down the street. Phil, Bob, and nobody even. They didn't, like that, if they did that. And it was that kind of a community, very safe. That was it. After that, after the tour buses came around and started saying, oh, the home of the Grateful Dead, the fearsome Grateful Dead. There they are. And in that house, I just got tired of mooning the buses. So they stopped coming.
I think that guy.
When you guys built the Wall of Sound, do you have any good stories about that?
Say again?
Say that again.
The Wall of Sound?
Oh, yeah, Wall of Sound. Wall of Sound was an experiment in terror again. We decided, when we started, there was no PAs. They were only like in the ballparks, first base and second base, and that's all there were. There were no PAs as we know them today. PAs were a twin reverb, and a bass bottom. That was the PA that we would set up. And then eventually we knew there was no PAs or any kind of electronic stuff, so we started studying it and everything, and it worked its way down, up, until it became what they call the Wall of Sound, which was the Wall of Sound. It was like 45 feet tall. It was just over everything. It was it was perfect Grateful Dead, just completely over the edge. And it almost killed us because it cost more to run it and operate it than we could make at the concerts. So we came in debt, hundreds of thousands of dollars just to get great sound. Perfect Grateful Dead story. We worked our way almost in bankruptcy to build the greatest wall of sound in the world.
But you made a perfect sound system.
What's that?
But you, in so doing, you made a perfect sound system. That's Grateful Dead.
Yeah,
it was just completely nuts. One of the sound guys said to me, I'm sure most everybody here has seen Spinal Tap, right? And where the guy says, see, this one goes to 11. It's, they're really, because for most bands,
to 12.
But the thing about the Wall of Sound, there were 600 speakers in it. And the thing about the Wall of Sound was, because there was so much, there was zero distortion because they only went to 2. And they could still peel your face off at a quarter mile. Pretty good. Somebody else?
True, I never heard it. Yeah, you're absolutely right. At a half a mile, it would take your face.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was.
We were playing to more and more people.
So
So
you-
we had to start building because nobody was building for us, and that was the problem. We would build our own speaker boxes and get the speakers from JBL, and so we had to learn all of this stuff until we realized we know more than anybody else in the world about this stuff. And our sound is pristine. It's just absolutely, it's the gold standard then and it is now, thanks to a gentleman by the name of John Meyer, who builds our system now. He was our engineer back then, and now he is the gold standard in speaker building. So that was another reason that we loved our fans, and we treated them really well. We knew that we were dealing sound by the pound, really, you know. In a way, if you look at it like that, you know, sound was so important to us that many times during our lifetime, we bankrupt ourselves. I mean, we owed Bank of Boston $600,000, and we would play to support the sound. And then one day, we had a meeting up there in our office, and Jerry always noodled. When we, you know, always had noodles going while we were talking. And he drew this one thing. It was like a dragon, a snake dragon, eating its tail. And I go, oh yeah. She says, this is us. And that's when that all went down. And then we started getting reasonable, and John had his speakers, and we, you know, and all so forth.
He saved you.
And saved us.
Couple more
questions?
I just want to say that 8 weeks ago, I had the good fortune to get on a plane in Oakland and see both shows at the Hollywood Bowl. And you haven't missed a lick.
I heard some of it.
I hadn't seen you since we lost Jerry on stage. And the first night, June 3rd, I was 40th row center. The second night, 4th row center. I was totally blown away, visual, audio. For days, it just echoed in my head. But to prepare for it, I was listening to stuff on YouTube, and I ran across a 96 interview with Branford Marsalis, and he talked about your jazz influences.
Yes.
Woo! So what do you have to say about yourselves as a jazz band that happens to play rock and roll?
It's a good question, and that's right at the core of everything. It's improvisation. And that's part of the magic and the glory of it all, is that there was no leaders in the band. No one told anybody what to do. No one ever said that you can't do that. You can't do that. And there was never any blame. That's how we lasted so long. We never blamed each other. And there was a lot of blame to go around. But we never blamed each other. But the core of our music was improvisation. We loved that. Once we found out we could do anything, we're the Grateful Dead. We can do anything. Once we realized that, then everything changed. So, you know, we were an improvisational band because we wanted to have a conversation. And that's what music is really about. It's conversational. So that conversation lasted 30 years. I mean, it definitely evolved. It went up, went down, sideways, but we had this conversation. It attracted all the jazz guys because that's what they were doing. Grateful Dead is jazz. But we're a rock and roll band. Oh, we're a rock and roll band? Oh, jazz band? Jazz band? But we did both. And that was why great musicians like Branford and all those guys wanted to jam with us, or Ned Coleman. Can you believe these guys, you know, and, you know, playing with us? And it was just no big deal, you know. I mean, it was great. Here's another person in the conversation, and they loved us. And we were right for them. We found freedom in improvisation. Remember, back then, there's no set lists. We didn't know what we were going to play when we walked out on stage. You have to set this thing first. He who played the first note or rhythm, that's where we went to. And like 4 hours later, we wound up and we go, okay, bye. And then we left. But we didn't know what we were playing. We went one song into the other. We never stopped. And that's the idea of jazz. You have a rhythm, you have a groove, you have a mindset, you go through it. And if you have this kind of inspiration to be able to be free and to take chances. And we failed many times, a band of failures, I would say. But also, we rang the bell a lot. And that's the thing. We hit that, when we hit that moment of magic, then that was it. That was worth going to a couple of concerts to see us blunder around on stage and not be able to hit the mark. But when we hit the mark, there's nothing like it. And we felt it, and they felt it. And that's why we have our army today. We recruited our army head by head.
One by one.
One by one. We went out and toured and toured and toured. Maybe until they couldn't resist us. They had a...
Yeah, you wore them down.
Yeah, we wore them out. But we got them. And
Okay.
now we go out and we have... The army is still there as Dead and Company.
And a happy army it is.
Thank you.
I think we're getting late, so we're going to do about 2 more, and I saw a bunch of hands up in this corner,
Young lady.
including that nice young lady in the
Hi, I
black
have
dress.
one question for each of you, which is, can you say one thing that's making you optimistic? I know we've spent a lot of time looking backwards, but either environmental or musically or brain science or what? What is making you optimistic?
Take one?
You
Well, there's hope.
start.
I see hope everywhere. I have to see hope, or else there'd be nothing. And I'm proactive, so I go out there and do that. When I was in Washington, we hung out with Nancy Pelosi for an hour, Senator Leahy for an hour, talked about things, and so that's what gives me hope that we have great leaders out there still, and they're trying the best they possibly can, and that many people are going to these very important issues like climate change and and so forth. And the political scene is such I have no words for it. Words don't come to my mouth. I'm sorry, I can't say anything about it. You probably all feel something about that your own selves, and you know it's not right. So I feel it's good. There's light at the end of the tunnel. How about that? I don't feel very good about where I am now because we're in desperate places. But you know what? The way I do it is when the music hits my ear, then I go someplace else. Whether it's be in my studio or me on the stage, then I'm transported to a whole other place where I can think clearly. I have none of the encumbrant things that are happening on this, necessarily to me, my pains, my aches, all of that stuff. There's none of that. So the way I do it is it's not about drugs. It's about music for me. As soon as the music hits my ear, I change and I feel better about everything. But when the music stops, it isn't so
It's
good.
still the same world.
Okay.
Caryl?
Yeah, I mean, that's really a hard question, because there's a micro, that I see. But I think that when I have had a couple of seconds to think about it, and I think it really is that, if you look in this room, and I bet if each of you were to be up here and talk about what you're doing, it would be so incredible, and it would be something that we all could feel really good about. And I think that that's sort of like a nucleus. And I see Sonoma County, if you look at Sonoma County and all the great stuff that's going on here, all the things that we care about, and then you build out from that. There's so many of those I call them, when I think in Parks World, I think there's the super green, the super deep green. And you have the super deep green, like a beautiful national park, and then you have shades of green. And I think all over the world, you see these really incredible nucleus of energy and effort, and it's a lot with young people. So I think I go back to what Mickey's saying with hope, and I think we can't just look at this moment in time. There's that saying, which unfortunately I can't remember, but things always moving in a positive. They go up and down. I mean, I'm sure probably one of you can remember, but it's that things always will trend in this sort of positive direction, and I think we can't forget that, and we have to just believe that's what's going to happen. So.
Yeah, but you can't just be a believer.
No, you have to be an activist.
You have to be an activist. You can believe. Believers believe. They believe, they believe, they believe. That they believe. They believe. But you have to go out. You got to go out, you got to go out, you got to do what you got to do to bring it on home. And so being a musician allows me access to all of these hopeful things. You have to go out there and do it. You got to do it in your own life, you know, or else it won't spread to anybody else. If you don't have it, that feeling, you can't give it to anybody else. If you don't have it in your heart, the feeling, the good feeling of hope and so forth, you can't give it away if you don't have it. So you got to find it in your own heart to be able to raise your consciousness, get up, you know, in the morning, do something positive, you know. That Scoop Nisker, remember Scoop?
Scoop Nitzker.
Scoop Nisker always had a good word for you. Yes, he was one of a radio personality here in the Bay Area.
At K-Fog, right?
K-San.
K-San.
If you don't like, he goes, you don't like the news? Go out and make some of your own.
All right, Dennis, what about you?
So I'm gonna say something, and then we're gonna have one last question. And my comment is that, you know, no arguing we live in dark times, but I'm a historian. I've been wallowing in dark times since I started reading. You know, there's always dark. If you look at, for instance, the early 50s and McCarthyism, it's, you know, and what people were willing to do in terms of suspending all rights. There's a lot more noise now. I'm active with the ACLU as it happens, and you know, our finest recruiter of funds is a man named Donald J. Trump, who, I mean, he makes announcements and people reach for the checkbook. Us in Planned Parenthood. But that's serious, but I'm dead serious when I say, it's people like George Smoot. The fact that I've lived to see a time when scientists, when the mind of people can locate the beginning of time, at least this cycle, the one that we happen to be in, which is the only one at this point I care about, that's mind-blowing. I mean, truly mind-blowing and wonderful. And this, as I heard the story, Mickey was on the radio talking about this or that, you know, one of the interesting things he gets into. And George Smoot was driving around Berkeley listening to KPFA, because what do professors at Berkeley do but listen to KPFA? and he heard this and went, I got to talk to this guy.
Oh, I didn't know that.
He sought you out.
Oh, I see.
And eventually, I think he connected with Betsy, who brought him to Shoreline.
Terrific.
But that kind of thing is like, well, it makes me proud to have worked for the Grateful Dead, I'll tell you that much. Okay, last question. Come on now, it's got to be a good one. And you got your hand up. There you go. Good shirt. Oh, yes, very.
Yeah, since we find ourselves in the Schulz Museum, I have to ask, do you have any words about Pigpen?
Pigpen's Pigpen. Pigpen's Pigpen. I can't really, you know, I mean, Pigpen was our lead singer. And of course, he took his name from Pigpen. So, yeah. Full circle.
It is full circle.
Before it's over, I want to thank Sparky, wherever you are, for bringing light into this world. Absolutely. And I would like to and of course, Jeannie is, please, thank you very much. Thank you so much. Is that, should we call it?
I think that was a good, who's going to top that question?
I know, I mean, Pigpen's Pigpen.
There you go.
What can I say?
And literally, you know, the Grateful Dead got its lead singer out of the Peanuts. What can you do with that? Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Mickey. Yep.